Welcome to the Park Circle. Grab a Bible. Check out Numbers 35, starting in verse 9. And let's play around together. Verse 35 is all about setting up cities of refuge. So these are Levitical cities where people can flee. Before we jump into this passage, it's worth remembering that Moses is giving laws to Israel that they will follow as their nation is functioning as a theocracy. So there's not going to be a king or even much of a governmental structure, but the Lord will reign over them. So what we have in this passage is how the people of Israel are going to deal with capital crimes, murder, where it'll take some time to distinguish between murder and negligent manslaughter or accidental death. So they're told that when they take possession of the land, they're going to name 6 cities to be cities of refuge, 3 to the east of the Jordan in Canaan, and 3 to the west of the Jordan in the land of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. There we go. And that these cities will be cities where people can flee to when there's an accidental death. So in the passage, we see this idea of the avenger of blood, one who would seek justice for the murdered individual. Now, we've not really seen this before, and it's not really well explained. My guess is that this avenger of blood is probably a surviving family member who would seek justice for the slain. And this is a big part of why an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is so important, because it limits what these family members can do and avoids blood feuds. I think it is worth noting, too, that Paul uses the language of an avenger when he talks about government being a tool for God to judge the guilty and reward the innocent or the righteous. So it's possible, if not probable, that the idea of this avenger of blood is leaving space to say there's always going to be someone whose responsibility it is to prosecute murderers and the guilty. So, back to the passage at hand. We have these cities of refuge, which basically amount to a place where if someone dies, the person responsible for the death can flee to the city of refuge to be protected from the blood avenger. Makes it make more sense as to why these cities should be scattered throughout Israel. Seems like these cities need to be more or less within a day's journey of anywhere in Israel so that you can actually flee there successfully. Verse 15 tells us that these cities are specifically for those who might kill a person without intent. Intent ends up being really key in the application of this particular passage. Since the issue is one of intent, the idea is that if a man is struck down with any tool that could cause death intentionally, then the blood avenger will put him to death. He's a murderer. It's also clear that they're guilty of murder if there's premeditated nature to it. I particularly notice if he lies in wait for his brother, because we see over and over again in the Proverbs and the Psalms that lying in wait for one is a sure sign of wickedness. If we see all the intentional murder cases as a situation where the blood avenger then becomes executioner, rightly so. Verse 22 tells us about how the man might be found innocent. So if we're looking at a case where the man had no beef, no particular reason for seeking out to kill the person who died, if there's an accidental death where something gets dropped on him, he won't die for this reason. But the process is going to be a little bit more complicated. The first thing we might notice here is that it's the congregation who's going to stand in judgment. Got a little congregational action going on here. Presumably, this is the congregation or assembly in the refuge city, and they're going to stand in judgment between the accused or the manslayer and the avenger of blood. You also see that there's rules to guide this process as the congregation judges between them. First, we see it really is the responsibility of the congregation to rescue the manslayer from the avenger of blood if it really was an accidental death. This is distinctly different from a congregation that's acting as a mob. Now, this refuge takes the form of the manslayer having to live in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Fairly confident this is as close as ancient Israel gets to incarceration as a way of punishing the guilty. The passage makes it clear that the sentence is until the death of the high priest. And if the avenger of blood finds him outside the city, before that time, he can put him to death. Yay! In verse 30, we see that when the congregation is making judgments between the manslayer and the avenger of blood, that they're not allowed to put anyone to death except on the account of witnesses, and certainly more than one witness. The passage ends by telling us that there's no way out of this. No monetary ransom should save the life of one who deserves death or shorten the sentence of a manslayer from his time in the city of refuge. The shedding of innocent blood pollutes the land, and there's no way to make atonement for it apart from the blood of the one who is guilty. The Lord regularly brings this accusation before the people throughout the minor prophets. Never park this pen's position. Get yourself an Air Bolt. I hope you've enjoyed this little bit longer walk through the text. There's so much in here that I find interesting that our own legal system is connected to. The distinctions between murder and manslaughter show up here. The idea of the testimony of multiple witnesses, sentencing guidelines for the manslayer and murder. Where do we see Jesus in all this? Well, the Lord's clearly there at the end of the passage, dwelling among his people. But I'm confident that so much of this passage is meant to teach us that the Lord values justice in human life. And he's given us patterns for how to establish this. We can rejoice that he does dwell among his people, and he expects justice of us. Because the Lord dwells among his people, he expects us to love justice and mercy, to do righteousness. The congregation, his people, are to judge rightly, and to defend the guilty. That sounds wrong, but it's true, because the Lord forgives. Let's trust in him today. Keep reading Numbers. Almost done. And I'll see you next time.